Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 21st of May. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with the very latest weather information from our website or your NOAA Weather Radio. We can be reached online at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find us on Twitter under NWS Alaska, NWS Anchorage or NWS Juneau or NWS Fairbanks. Find us on Facebook under NWS Alaska and on YouTube as well. In the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefings there, about 2.5 minutes long. Perfect to check out the weather situation if you're in the bush and you don't want to download a whole lot of information, but you want the weather for the next 2 days. That's the place to go. After the show, you can get the entire broadcast of what you're watching right now by going to YouTube and search for AKWX TV, Alaska Weather TV for short. You'll get the entire broadcast there a little bit later on in the evening. Here's a look at the satellite picture, high-res satellite image, just like what we showed you yesterday. This one, of course, is a day later now. You can see low pressure spinning out over the Gulf. We've got clouds in the shot. Here's Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula now covered up with some cloud cover, some snow, and also smoke. That's what's visible blowing into low pressure here and now over Kodiak at times as well. This will continue to be the story as long as we've got a low sitting right here and a light northerly flow, sometimes picking up, sometimes letting up across the Kenai. But this is certainly dragging in more smoke in here. And as far as the sky remains fairly clear across most of South Central, we shouldn't have any trouble seeing the smoke from this far above the surface of the Earth. You can see more images like this anytime by looking at our satellite pictures at weather.gov/Anchorage. There you look at the satellite shot when you get there. Fire danger continues to grow across South Central and the interior. A large portion of the Yukon Valley is under red flag warnings at this hour, stretching from the Alcan all the way out toward the YK Delta. Fire danger in particular remains at least high across the Tanana Valley and parts of the Yukon Valley, stretching up into the Fort Yukon Flats, as well as extreme out across areas on the western side of the Alaska Range, across the Mat-Su, and of course across parts of the Kenai Peninsula, and high danger continues across Kodiak Island at this point as well. So a lot of burnable fuels and a lot of conditions that are favorable for fire to spread quickly if it begins. So do your part and make sure it does not begin by obeying burn bans in your communities, and before lighting any open flame or starting any fires, even on your own property, make sure you check with fire officials in your community to make sure that's okay. Chances are there are at least some restrictions in your region. Here's a look at the Bering Sea satellite picture now. Is there any hope for rain across southern parts of Alaska? Well, across southeast, the answer is yes. Across south central, the answer is probably more of a mostly no. There are some showers that could pop up across the mountains tonight and probably across some other areas, but mostly any major surge of moisture is not headed this way. The major storm track right now is located to the south. We've got a ridge of high pressure across the southern Bering Sea that is dragging moisture up from the Pacific across the Kamchatka Peninsula, and it has to go up and over that to make any impact across south central or a large part of northern southeast, or the interior for that matter. So it's got a long way to travel and to dry up before it ever reaches us in any sizable fashion. Look at the visible satellite picture. Here's that low pressure system we saw dragging the smoke out to sea, and it is just falling apart. We do have moisture making its way into southeastern Alaska, and in some cases that might even bring some heavier rainfall to southern parts of southeast here in the coming days. In the meantime, high pressure is locking in the low clouds, stratus, and fog across a large part of the Bering. Places that will probably be more impact than others will be the northern side of the Alaska Peninsula, the eastern chain, the Pribilof, St. Matthew Island waters, and that's about where it stops. Once you get out into Norton Sound, a clear sky seen there. In fact, the waters are opening up according to our latest sea ice analysis, and we'll have a look at that coming up here when we get to your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Looking at the surface weather chart, you can see a pretty clear sky across most of Alaska this afternoon. Across the coastal part of the Arctic, you'll notice areas of snow and snow showers, a little bit more of a steadier snow, light from Barrow eastward toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. And across the west, pretty dry conditions there, likely some areas of mist and drizzle under some of the low cloud cover. Dry conditions for south central and the interior. And here's the next batch of rain working into southeastern Alaska. A lot of that really focusing on British Columbia late this afternoon, but it looks like as we go ahead into the evening hours, some of that will creep up as warmer air is lifting northward slowly. A better chance for some of that to reach into the center parts of the inner waterways and more of southeast. Across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain, areas of light drizzle and maybe a little bit of light rain possible. Other than that, mostly dry weather for the interior, a shower or two around Northway, perhaps Eagle in the 40-mile country. Some light snow north of the Brooks Range summit or over the higher terrain, but most of the Arctic coast should be pretty dry. And high pressure just south of the Gulf of Vanderdeer, responsible for some more brisk winds across the YK Delta running into the AK Peninsula. But other than that, things are really pretty quiet right now. Looks like cold front will drop southward from the Arctic as we head into Thursday. With that, we'll keep the risk of snow showers going across the coastal plain and the north slope there. The winds will change up a little bit, but high pressure sitting across the northern Yukon at 1,021 millibars is guiding mostly dry weather into the interior and south central. So as that air runs into the higher terrain of the Alaska Range, watch for some showers, especially during daytime heating tomorrow. Most of that will stay over the mountains. Once you get south of that, the air looks pretty dry. And for the Kenai Peninsula, the Cook Inlet, Anchorage, and Matsu, conditions should remain fairly dry, except for some of the surrounding hillsides there. You might get a brief shower. Looks like smoke will be a part of your day again tomorrow across the southern Kenai Peninsula. Prince William Sound looks fairly dry. Low pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf, dragging in more of that warm and wet air into southern parts of southeast, and there could be some heavier rain. Places like the Misty Fjords will be looking at a better chance of that. And high pressure dragging in Pacific moisture to the western Bering might bring out some rainfall. Even that seems to be drying up for Friday. Widespread areas of fog across the Bering and parts of the Aleutians as usual. Colder air trying to drop southward even more. Can't make it over the Brooks Range just yet. Snow more likely across places like Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse out toward Kaktovik. Maybe a mix of rain and snow a little bit further east of Fort Yukon, and a better chance of that becoming showers once you get as far south as Fort Yukon and Eagle and, of course, Northway. Maybe a brief shower around the Copper River Basin. Even those mountain showers are drying up as we head into Friday. Dry conditions prevail across the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys, southward toward Bristol Bay. And again, we're still dealing with a little bit of a breeze from the YK Delta southward. Other than that, some rainfall across southeast, occasionally heavy across southern parts, but even that wave that was bringing that northward seems to be falling apart. So we'll call it light to moderate rain at best at this point, but more places could be affected on Friday. Temperature-wise today, 40s and 50s for southeast, a little bit cooler than you saw last week. Juneau, low 50s, Sitka about 49. A little bit further south toward Ketchikan, Annette, and Metlakatla, upper 40s to about 50 degrees around Hyder. Prince William Sound, low to mid-50s there, 58 in Kenai, 62 in Anchorage, 63 in Talkeetna. Northway was showing 49, 61 though, warming up there in Fairbanks now, and 50 in Eagle. Fort Yukon was showing 58, 43 in Arctic Village, 28 in Anaktuvuk Pass, and you can see the remarkable difference the rise in terrain does to keep that cold located just across the north. Barrow was only 29 today, same as Kaktovik. Wainwright 27. Kotzebue Sound showing temps in the 30s and 40s. Kotzebue itself 42, Shishmaref 30, Nome was up to 45, and Unalakleet was 38 degrees with Bethel at 48, and Bristol Bay in the mid to upper 50s there. Kodiak 53 degrees, low to mid 40s for some of the southern parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Sand Point 48 degrees, Pilot Point and Port Hyden both in the mid 40s, and the Pribilofs only making it into the upper 30s today. Central and western chain upper 40s, Shemya only 41, St. Lawrence Island there was 32. Overnight low temperatures there down to 28 degrees, 30s and 40s for the chain, Kodiak Island 39. Around the Kenai Peninsula mid 30s to almost 40 degrees if you head across the hills towards Seward. 41 in Anchorage, 37 in Talkeetna, mid to upper 30s for the Tanana Valley, 33 in Fort Yukon, and mid 20s for the north, with southeast looking at temps closer to that 40-degree mark in the north, mid 40s the further south you go, with high temperatures there tomorrow back in the mid to upper 50s. Juneau closer to 60 degrees in some cases. South Central looking at highs in the low to mid 60s. That will be a dry day again, 58 degrees in Kodiak, mid to upper 50s for the interior, including places like Tanana and Fairbanks, both around 57 degrees, 53 in Fort Yukon. Temps below freezing for most of the Arctic coast, including Barrow, Wainwright, and Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. The Seward Peninsula typically in the mid 40s there, with Tin City a little bit cooler at 33. St. Lawrence Island up to 34, Nunivak Island 41, Bristol Bay looking at a warmer day in the low to mid 60s, and the Alaska Peninsula in the upper 50s to about 60 degrees. Flying weather should be just fine with exceptions, of course, being around Kenai Peninsula with some flight restrictions there. IFR conditions expected for the Arctic coast and the coastal plain and a wide swath of the Bering, with most of southeast at least approaching MVFR conditions around Juneau to Sitka. Points west, you'll have some improvements there, but MVFR located across the southern half. Checking on past conditions, you would expect at least some restrictions north of the Brooks Range, thanks to snow and low clouds there. Otherwise, VFR once you get north of that boundary. Same goes for Adigan Pass tomorrow, and just about everywhere else should be VFR, including Lake Clark and Merrill and Rainy Pass, all the way around to Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass should be just fine. Mentasta Pass, pretty quiet and clear day there. Tanita Pass expected to be VFR. Portage looking pretty good for your Thursday, and Chilkoot and White Pass should show some improvements over what we saw earlier this morning. Freezing lines now. Here's your surface freezing line that is mainly north and along the Yukon Valley out across the Bering Strait. There are going to be some colder pockets there south along the Alaska Range, but by and large temperatures should hover above freezing or get there very quickly in the morning. Across the west, you can see the ridging of that warmer air punching into the Bering Sea, and some cooler air located around the Wrangell, St. Elias, and parts of the eastern Copper River Basin. As you look at icing potential, we'll keep that mostly fixed on the north right now, below 12,000 but above 3,000 feet, and then below 12,000 but above 5,000 from the Dixon entrance and into places like the Misty Fjords again, located where some of that higher moisture content is. The jet stream shows what's keeping our weather status quo. A trough of low pressure situated right across the Gulf of Alaska has latched onto drier air and brings that southward and keeps a ridge of high pressure across the North Pacific firmly in place. So nobody's budging, and here we are once again, dry weather for a large part of the state. The most active weather is coming in well to our south, but occasionally grazing southern parts of southeast right here on this main flow of the jet stream. And so any little storm that gets caught up in this briefly comes up north and then is pushed eastward just as quickly. Here's 9,000 feet, and you can see the trough of low pressure coming into the coastal plain. That's guiding in some of those snow showers we've seen. Otherwise, it's our controlling friend, the ridge of high pressure across the central Aleutians. Very light winds, 10 to 15 knots rotating around that. And northerlies a little bit stronger as you come across the lower and mid-Yukon valleys, up to 25 knots or so across Bristol Bay, and then we're back to our light winds again across the Alaska Range, 5 to 10 knots or so. At 3,000 feet, a little bit of a change. Winds are even lighter at this level, though, across south central and southeast, only 5 to 10 knots until you get right under that jet stream we were just looking at, and that's where the winds pick up. But again, most of that is around Haida Gwaii and south of the Dixon entrance. Across the west, wind speeds very light across the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound, and Norton Sound, only 10 to 20 knots at best. The ridge of high pressure across the Bering, slowing things down again, only 5 to 15 knots tops across most areas. Turbulence potential then looks like this, below 6,000 feet for areas closer to that frontal boundary, moving northward ever so slightly into southern parts of southeast. Rain and visibility probably more of an issue than the turbulence there, but watch for at least a little bit of chop. And with the winds cruising down the YK Delta and across Bristol Bay, wouldn't be surprised to see at least some gap flow issues and maybe some waves setting up below 6,000 feet. Watch for some light to isolated moderate, and then way out in the west of Attu, below 6,000 feet, probably looking at some light to isolated moderate there. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with a recap of the next couple days' weather, marines, and of course a look at your sea ice edge. Stay with us.
The following program is brought to you by the Ocean Alaska Science and Learning Center, a partnership dedicated to understanding and preserving the marine ecosystem connecting Alaska's national parks through research and education. The pristine wilderness of Kenai Fjords National Park is becoming increasingly popular as a destination for kayak campers. As visitor use increases, so does the interaction and potential for conflict between humans and wildlife. Black bears are abundant along the park's coastline, and park managers are interested in preventing negative interactions and protecting both bears and park visitors. A team of researchers is investigating how bears react to human presence in Kenai Fjords National Park. Steve Partridge, biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, is one of the principal investigators in this study.
I think the original focus of it was to try to determine how people's activities in the fjords here affect bear behavior, and especially in places like these meadows that are really important, especially early on for bears. Typically they're losing weight right now as before the berries come out, so anything they can get in the way of green vegetation is good for them. So I think what we wanted to initially do is look at how people moving around in the meadows or approaching on kayaks or power boats affected these bears in the meadows. And so what we've done is found bears in these meadows, and depending on where the bears were, we might approach them on a power boat, or we might try to get in on a kayak. But what we're doing is we're with laser rangefinders, we're trying to figure out when the bear notices the person's approach first, and so that would be a distance that we definitely want. And then the next distance we would want, at what point does the bear change its behavior from what it was doing previously, which is generally foraging, to maybe just staring at us now and not eating anymore. And then the probably most important one is, at what point does the bear decide now it wants to leave? It's uncomfortable, people are too close.
Researchers patrolled areas known to be frequented by black bears in early spring. When they sighted a bear, they began a systematic approach, recording the bear's behavior as they drew nearer and nearer.
Bear on the right's watching us too. 205. Yeah.
I'm not sure the exact numbers, but I want to say probably what we'd call the flushing distance, probably averaged right around 100 meters, which I think is fairly consistent.
Since black bears are so abundant in Kenai Fjords, park managers have made efforts to limit human and bear interactions by providing food storage lockers or lines for hanging food on the most popular beaches, and requiring bear-resistant food containers at other locations. Containers can be checked out at the park headquarters in Seward free of charge.
I don't think that this park has had any history of a few, I think, tent destruction cases, but nothing serious where any kind of, injury was involved, I don't believe. So I don't know, it wasn't a safety issue, I think. It's maybe just trying to look and see if we could, as this part of the bay becomes more popular, try to get in ahead of the curve and putting together some really good guidelines for kayakers to try to minimize any disturbance that people may have in these meadows.
The Nuka Bay region, where Partridge's team was working, is the more seldom visited part of Kenai Fjords National Park. It also contains more extensive meadow habitat than the more steep-sided fjords elsewhere in the park.
And these places provide some of the only opportunities they have, or the earliest opportunities they have, to get grass. And a lot of these places that are snow-free, at least back to a little ways. So there's always a little vegetation on the periphery that they can get. So it's definitely important in early season, and just good forage for them, I think. So.
Another part of the study involved monitoring the most productive meadows with time-lapse video cameras for several days with no humans present, then establishing a camp in the meadow to see if the bear's foraging behavior was affected. This data has not been fully analyzed yet. In general, though, Partridge was surprised at how oblivious some bears can be to human presence.
Or there's a misconception about how much bears are paying attention to their surroundings. I think a lot of people think they're really tuned into everything, and they can they see at a mile or smell you at a mile. But I think a lot of times, since they're not typically worried about predators, they kind of get in their own little world, like the absent-minded professor. And boy, I've surprised a lot of bears, and as probably a lot of other people have, without trying it at all. So that was surprising. That I think it's I think sometimes they're not paying as much attention as you think they should be. you know, you learn out here for sure how difficult it is to try to tease these things out. And I think probably, if nothing else, I think we'll get great data on the approaches. I think we can provide Kenai Fjords with some good information there. And I think a lot of people, if you just tell them that, you know, hey, here's these meadows and there's going to be a lot of bears in there and it's a good area for them to feed, that they'll probably avoid those areas because they don't want to disturb the animals. And a lot of times they just need the information. And so hopefully we'll be able to provide a lot of good basic information on how these bears are using these meadows.
In the end, park managers hope to use the information that Partridge and his co-investigators are gathering to minimize the potential for negative or harmful interactions between bears and park visitors, while maximizing the opportunities for bears to thrive and people to enjoy the wilderness of Kenai Fjords National Park.
I think, you know, we still have a really good chance up here to preserve wild populations of bears, and there's a lot of areas I think that there's really good conservation efforts. So for a bear biologist, this is a dream come true, you know. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff to do up here. So.
Thanks for staying with us. Here's a look at your marine weather forecast, starting with an update from the Sea Ice Edge and the Sea Ice Desk at the Anchorage National Weather Service office in the Sea Ice program. Norton Sound is pretty much ice-free at this point, so if you're around any of the Norton Sound communities, you've probably seen a pretty rapid improvement in the last couple days, if not the last week and a half or so. You'll notice some breaks in the ice there south and west of Nome and around St. Lawrence Island. And next up, the Bering Strait. We'll see how fast that improves. But again, Norton Sound pretty much ice-free. Kotzebue Sound now starting to show some rapid changes there. And with that, if you're in Shishmaref, you should probably keep in mind that the shore-fast ice not only is melting in place, probably some flooding along there as well. But that, of course, is becoming unstable pretty quickly. So any communities now around the Kotzebue Sound area should watch for that shore-fast to get very unstable if it's not there already. Here's a look at southeast now. For Thursday, winds remain pretty light, even with a front moving up. You can see kind of the changes in the wind direction as that front is lifting northward, and that'll bring some heavier rainfall again to the Misty Fjords area, maybe around Ketchikan and Metlakatla, so keep an eye on some changes there tomorrow. Otherwise, winds are coming into the coast and then blowing into the storm as that's coming up. Winds around 15 knots, seas running around 5 to 6 feet on the coast, and more of a southerly flow across the Lynn Canal, 10 feet with a 2-foot sea. Friday, a little bit of a change. The winds pick up a little bit more from the west, so onshore flow 20 to 25 knots, looking at 5 to 6 feet in the north, 7 to 8 feet in the south, coming into the Dixon entrance. Northwesterlies coming down the Clarence and Chatham Strait now, and westerlies once you get into the Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage. More of a southerly flow in the Lynn Canal, though. That's still light, around 10 knots. Offshore winds from Homer and Resurrection Bay, expect around 15 knots or so tomorrow. Outside of Prince William Sound, 4-foot seas there, and for most of the western and northern Gulf. A variable flow inside of Prince William Sound, 2-foot seas there. Northwesterlies in the northern Cook Inlet, otherwise northerly flow coming down around Kenai and southward toward Homer. Variable flow west of the Barrens and relatively light winds also in the Shelikof Strait. Waves there only 2 to 3 feet or so. Friday, the winds pick up a little bit more from the west, coming onshore to Kenai, Coho, Soldotna. More of a northwesterly flow across the Barrens, 15 knots with a 3 to 4-foot sea. Variable flow on either side of Kodiak Island and across the northern Cook Inlet, I should say. And a northerly flow inside of Prince William Sound becoming variable for the western Gulf and the north. Seas still running around 4 feet for Friday. Looking at the Alaska Peninsula, expect more of a northerly flow, and this is probably where we'll see some of our strongest and maybe gustier winds there as the winds come down through the Capes in southwest Alaska. You'll see them reach as high as 25 knots. They're coming into Cold Bay with 7-foot seas there, only 3 feet inside of Bristol Bay. A variable wind from Castle Cape all the way down to Chignik, 10 knots with a 4-foot sea, 5-foot seas south of Sandpoint and King Cove with a 15-knot wind. All winds turn to the north and west for Friday, 15 to 20 knots there on the north side. For the Pacific side, you're looking at 15 knots with a 4 to 5-foot sea to wrap up the week. So a little bit of a change for the Alaska Peninsula toward Friday. Variable and light winds across the west and west central chain as we get into Thursday. Northerlies also a little stronger here from Adak to Atka and southward into the Pacific, upwards of 25 knots with a 6-foot sea across the Pacific. 5 to 6 foot seas across the Bering Sea side. And as you look at Friday, you'll notice the winds lessen somewhat, around 10 to 15 knots across the west and west central chain. 3 foot seas there, 4 foot seas as you get into the Bering. Winds are more variable, and we still have our northerly winds on Alaska at 25 knots with a 5 foot sea, otherwise 15 to 20 knots across the Pacific from the north and northwest, 4 foot seas on the Pacific side. Across the west, northerly flow was zipping down the YK Delta and through the Bering Strait. 20-knot winds in just about all areas. 2 foot seas around St. Lawrence Island in the ice-free waters. And where that's happening, freezing spray will remain a threat, so watch it there. Around Kuskokwim Bay, 20 knots with a 6 foot sea. About the same there for the Pribilofs. As you get into Friday, a little bit of a shift. More of a westerly onshore push coming to Hooper Bay and Ammonok and Norton Sound. 2 to 3 foot seas in the north from the St. Matthew Island waters northward. Otherwise, we're keeping that northwesterly flow going around Kuskokwim Bay and around the Pribilofs, 15 to 20 knots with a 4 to 5 foot sea there. And across the north, a westerly flow from Cape Lisburne northward toward Kaktovik, 10, 15, even 20 knots with the strongest winds around Kaktovik. Northerlies coming onto the northern side of the Seward Peninsula, so Tin City, Shishmaref, and a good part of Kotzebue Sound looking at more of a northerly flow around 15 knots. That diminishes on Friday, 5 knots even around Point Hope and Cape Lisburne, more of a northeasterly flow from Wainwright to Point Lay, and northerlies from Barrow to Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik with a little bit of a turn to the north and west for Friday there. So still looking at some light winds wrapping up the week. Recapping tonight's weather, the best chance for some heavier rain will be across southern parts of southeast. Elsewhere, just about all other communities in our great state remain dry. A few showers across Northway and Eagle perhaps this evening, and snows likely across the Brooks Range, mainly across the coastal plain with drizzle across parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Tomorrow, some mountain and high elevation showers across the Alaska Range and some of the parts in south central and the west, but very limited moisture there. It looks like snow showers in the north with a cold front approaching the coastal plain. Again, the best chance for any precipitation that matters probably across southern parts of southeast for Thursday. As we get into Friday, even the mountain showers are drying up across south central. Looks for some light rain across southeast. Snow showers gradually moving eastward with colder and drier air moving on shore in the north, and we're back to dry weather across the west. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.